In this week's episode, we're going to take a look at Microsoft SharePoint Online from the beginner's perspective. How do you get started? And more importantly, can I do this in less than half an hour? Let's find out. Greetings fellow YouTubers, welcome to my classroom here in Oslo. On this week's episode I thought I'd take a look at SharePoint Online. I was thinking I've not done a session on this for ages. So if you're a beginner in Microsoft SharePoint or you just want to improve your skills, then I guarantee that this session will definitely answer some of your questions. So just to remind you, by the way, if you've not subscribed to my channel, bump that subscribe button up there, ring that bell and come and join our great learning community. And if you've got questions about this or any of my other sessions, of course, just get those down below and I'll do my very best for you. All right. So I think without any further ado, let's jump in with the session and hopefully I can do this in 30 minutes. All right, hope you enjoy. So as always, I'm going to kick off here with my Microsoft 365 and this is from the end user perspective, of course. And in here, I'm going to come up to my applications and I'm going to come down and we're going to take a look at SharePoint. Now, SharePoint has actually been around for quite a number of years, starting out in 2001 as the Digital Dashboard Project, and has become one of the world's most powerful collaborative tools, which fully integrates into features like Microsoft Teams and OneDrive, just to name a few. And as you can see here, this open point really shows me all the different websites that I have in my organization, at least the websites that I have access to. So in here, you can see that you've got this really nice card-based system. This is called Microsoft Delve actually, and it's part of SharePoint now. But essentially, you can see that I've got my Microsoft 365 groups. And yes, whenever you create a Microsoft 365 group, it also creates your own site as well, your own team site. Now, there are different types of templates that you can use. So typically, you can have something like a communications site. And if I click onto something like the landing here, you can see it really does look quite cool. And this is using the communications site template. Now, you can customize all elements of this simply by coming up to this little gear icon here. And if I click onto this, of course, you need to have the appropriate permissions for this. But ultimately, you can go and you can add pages, you can change the configuration, you can change the contents, you can change the look and feel and set the permissions and so on. So again, if you have the appropriate permissions. But for end users, this is such a fantastic feature because you can have your own kind of corporate intranet site. And as you can see, if I just head back to this main page here, I can also create a new site here, but you can also create a news post for this particular corporate landing page. Now, as I mentioned, when you create a Microsoft 365 group, a 365 group also creates things like a Teams website or a team site, and it will also create a shared mailbox, amongst other things. So you can see here I've got my Oslo accounts, and if I click into the Oslo accounts, again here is an example of a team site template. Now in the team site you can share documents. So an important concept of SharePoint is something called a document library. So you have a SharePoint document library here, which is essentially shared between a Microsoft team or a Microsoft 365 group. This can be up to 25 terabytes. Now, if I go back to 365, of course, the other option here, and a lot of people, again, misunderstand this. So here you have OneDrive for Business, and this is essentially your corporate home drive. So this is where you can store any corporate work that you're working on. Please note that this is not personal. This is not a personal OneDrive. This is for business reasons. Okay, so the difference between these two items, so SharePoint document libraries, is that it's shared. This is a shared repository, whereas OneDrive for Business, this is more of a personal repository of documents that you're currently working on. So that being that, the next thing that obviously you might want to do is, again, if I just go back into my landing page here, I'm going to go back into SharePoint. And in SharePoint, you can create a new site. And in the site, it says, okay, what kind of site do you want to create? Do you want to create a team site? So again, you can collaborate with a team, or do you want to create a communication site? So you have the choice. So again, for this example, I'm going to type in that I live in Stirling in Scotland, of course. So this is my Stirling HQ. I'll just call it my Stirling HQ site. And you can see it shows that the name is available. And again, it will automatically generate an email address, a description, and quite recently, we can also assign a sensitivity label to this. And I'll come back to that a little bit later. You can also assign privacy settings to this as well. So are you going to make it discoverable, which means it's public and discoverable and viewable by anybody? Or is it private and only members of the site can access this page? For the purpose of this demo, I'm going to make it public. And of course, in here, you can also choose your language for the site as well. So I'm going to click on next, and off it goes. And it says, hey, do you want to now add some members in? Well, I could add in, let's say, Alan. I could add in Adele. I could add in, who else? We could add in Cameron, okay? And I'm a big Star Trek fan, of course. Add in Jean-Luc Picard. So, interestingly, by the way, you can see I've now added my members in. Another interesting feature of SharePoint is that if you float your mouse pointer over the contact, this little card pops up. And indeed, you can show more information about the card. You can also see the organization. So where does, for example, Patty sit, or where does Adele sit within the organization? What's her role in the organization? So that can be really useful, actually. So now that I've finished, I'm just going to click on Finish, and you can now see that it's now created this default site template. So what do I want to do with it? Well, again, I can design my template, and there's some templates here that will help you with the design. So I can click on here, and there are some really nice designs here that you can use. So I could say, you know, I kind of like this. I think this kind of looks really cool. So again, I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to use this template here. So you notice how fast that is. So super fast, and check it out. I have now got this. So I can now start customizing this. And you'll now notice that at each stage, there is a learn item. So it takes you to Microsoft Learn, and you can have a look at that. But check it out. Look how cool this looks. So if we want to start adding elements to this site, I can add in a list. I can add in an additional document library, a page, a space, a news post, a link, a plan, and an app, and so on. Now, what about editing the site? How do I change the site? Well, first of all, you'll notice as I float my mouse pointer over this, you'll notice that it's kind of an element. Do you see that? These are called web parts. So each part of a SharePoint site is often known as a web part. And I can click onto my little pencil here, which is the edit page, and this will take me into the editor. And again, you can see that there is a web part, and you can simply drag and drop and even add new web parts in here simply by going into up here. So I can go in and I can add features in here if I want to. So again, I can just double click and I can change the text. I can move things around. I can customize it. I can flip things in and out if I want to. Now, when you've finished, all you simply do is you simply then go and publish those pages. So are you ready to do it? Off it goes and it republishes it. So you can see that it's also created a public group. Now, I mentioned that when you create a group in Microsoft 365, it also creates a team site, a website. Likewise, when you create a team site, it also creates a public group. How cool is that? So the next thing that you might want to do is you might want to take a look at the administration of a site. So clicking on the little gear icon here, you can go in, you can add an additional page to the site, add an app, you can view the site context, you can permissions. So for example, if I clicked onto permissions here, very important concept in SharePoint is the understanding the different permission levels. So you have site owners who essentially have full control. So I can go into site owners and I can add in additional owners if I want to. A site member has limited access. So in other words, you've got edit access, you can add content and so on. I can also adjust that. So I can grant full control, read, which just means read and execute, or I can remove that permission anytime that I want. The third level is for guests. So for example, if you wanted to add people outside the organization, you could add them in as site visitors. Again, you can give them as much or as little permissions as you want. Again, you can, if you want to change the template that I showed you, easy to do. Likewise, you can also look at the performance of the site. So how heavily is the site being used? I'm going to show you that in a moment. And again, you can also change the look of the site as well. So again, I can simply change the theme. I can change the color. Simple by clicking on any of these options. How nice is that? I think we need purple. That looks pretty cool. All right. Okay, so once I'm happy with that, I can simply just close that down and that's it. I'm up and running with my site. Again, it shows me when it was last published. I can view the details. Again, I can go into my documents and you'll notice here that it looks almost identical to the likes of OneDrive for Business. The only difference here, of course, is that it's a shared repository. So you can share the content between your colleagues in the team. All right, so there you go. That's just a quick overview of getting started with SharePoint. Up next, let's take a look then at administering SharePoint Online. So this time I'm kicking off in the SharePoint Admin Center, which you can find from the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. If you come down to Admin Centers, and here you will see SharePoint. So SharePoint, as I've mentioned, is essentially your storage engine for everything in Microsoft 365. It interfaces with Teams, Microsoft 365 groups, and of course you can also create individual sites as you've seen. Now this is the tenant admin, and you can be assigned SharePoint admin permissions, which means it gives you the full right to administer all the different features of SharePoint. So here on the landing page, you can see we have this card-based system which gives me some information about my current sites and the current usage and so on. And just to say that you can grab these headers and you can move them around, and you can also add in additional cards if you want to. So again, you can customize the page exactly how you want it to look. So up here, you've also got the What's New option here, and this will take you through to documentation on the new features, which can be found on learn.microsoft.com. So what have we got here then? Well, first of all, you can see I've got sites, I've got active sites, and deleted sites. So first of all, our active sites include, and as you can see, there's quite a number of different sites. Now first up, you can see that we have a number of different columns here. It shows you if the site is a team, so a Microsoft Teams. So when you create a Microsoft 365 group or a Microsoft team, it will also create a team site as well. If you have within Microsoft Teams, you can also have channels or subsites, you might almost want to call them. So you can have those as well. I'll just zoom in a little bit there. It shows me how much storage has been used, who is the primary admin of this particular site, if the site is a hub site, I'll come back to that shortly, and it also shows you what template that the site is using as well. Very useful is when the site had some last activity, and this can be useful because there's no point keeping sites and content that nobody's using. So again, this may be a decision that you might want to remove it. Shows you when it was created, when it was who created the site, how many views. So this shows you how popular the sites are, and as I said, if you've got a sensitivity label on that site as well. Also, I did mention that although SharePoint doesn't have any public websites, you are capable of sharing websites, for example, with organizations or individuals that you want to work with. And also it shows me if the site is a Microsoft 365 group, and of course you can customize those columns as well if you want to. Now, as similar to my last demo, you can also create a site here as well if you want to, and any sites that are deleted will essentially go into the deleted items container, and they'll stay here for about 90 days. And beyond that, you can restore this particular site if you want to, although do be aware that if you click on permanently delete, there is no way to get that site back. The next thing then, if I go into my sites, if I click into active sites, I'm going to scroll down. Let's see what we've got. So I have got some sites here, and I have got a site called Oslo. And you can see here that I've got 4 sites within Oslo, and the fact that Oslo is a Microsoft team. Andy, can you just explain that a little bit for me? Absolutely. So if I come back into 365, and if I come back into Microsoft Teams here, you will see that indeed I do have a Microsoft team called Oslo. Just wait for a moment to come in. All right, so you can see that I've got Oslo, and because I'm in Teams, we have a number of channels. Now those channels can be public, they can also be private. You can see that you've got like a little padlock here, and also this is a shared channel that you can use as well. Now, just to say that when you create a channel in Microsoft Teams, it creates a subsequent subsite. So you can see that you have those channels and teams here. And again, I can customize those if I want to. So Teams essentially is almost like a wrapper service. So SharePoint manages all the storage for Microsoft Teams, and Exchange manages all the messaging and the chat features that you might have. So bearing with that in mind, what else have we got? What else can we do? So if I click into the actual team here, you can see I now get some various settings. So again, it gives me some information about the site, when it was created, and pretty much the same as what was in the columns. Again, it shows me if any activity, so how much storage is in there. Again, I can also see my members here as well. And you can see that you've got the same options. You've got owners, members, site admins. So that means, and the reason why this is here is because I've got almost channels, you know, those channels. So if you want to assign somebody channel permissions or the individual site permissions, you can do that as well. Again, owners, admins, members, and so on. Very interesting is if you go into the settings page, you can also see here, you can make that decision. Do you want to let people outside the organization email this group? So again, collaboration might be important for you. Again, sending copies of emails. If you don't want this team to show up in Microsoft Outlook, fair enough. And again, you've got the option whether it's a private or a public. Do remember that public is discoverable by anyone. As I mentioned, you can also set a sensitivity label on the team. So if you're interested in sensitivity, check out my Microsoft Purview list on YouTube. You've also got external file sharing. I'll come back to that in a moment. And again, in terms of conversations, do you want to allow your users to edit messages and so on? So those are the kind of the settings here. Just go back, I realized. And then finally, you've got something called a hub site. So what is a hub site? Well, here you can see that if I go into the actual site itself, the way that this works is if I open up the site, you'll remember we were talking about designs and layout and things like that, and also the search options. So if you associate other subsites as hub sites in SharePoint, you can do a unified search across all of those sites. And also they share the same design elements as well. So this is really cool actually. You can create a hub site either from here, and I can go in and edit the hub site settings, or alternatively I can come up here and you can see, do you want to edit the hub site? Now at the moment you can see that this particular site is a hub site. But again, one of the nice things about hubs is that you can disassociate it, you can change it, you can flip it, you can associate it with any other site. So again, it's very, very fluid and super flexible. That's a great feature, by the way. All right, what else have we got here? So the next thing then are our policies. And policies, we've got two very important settings here. So one is sharing. And here in sharing, these are your tenant settings for sharing. So in other words, whatever you set here, it will affect every potential website. All right. Now, you've got both SharePoint and OneDrive. So if I just move this up just a little bit here, and we have 4 options. If you've not seen my video on guests, by the way, check out my identity playlist. I've got a number of videos on there that talk about how to manage guest access. Okay, so we've got SharePoint and OneDrive, and you can see that basically if you can share content with anyone. So this could potentially include anonymous users. Now you may not want that. So you have an option here, new and existing guests. So imagine if you're in Microsoft Teams or SharePoint and you want to invite somebody to collaborate. Well, in this method, you can choose an existing guest that an administrator has already created, or alternatively, you can actually go ahead and invite a guest. This option here indicates existing guests only. So unfortunately, you would not be able to invite your guests, only guests that exist already. So this is ideal for organizations that maybe have a more formal approach to inviting guests. And then finally, we also have the only people inside your organization. So again, this is internal only. And the other things that we can do here, you can see I can set the default folder link, so you can let them view or edit. So these are my default settings. And again, I can click on save. Personally, I think probably one of the best options is that if I just move this up a little bit, I think this is probably the best one that most companies tend to use. So I'm going to click on save. Now, when we talk about sharing, of course, you also saw in the SharePoint sites that there was also a sharing tab. And you can get access to this from a number of places. So if I open up the Bergen site here, and if I go into my settings, again, you can see that you've got that external sharing here. Now, I'm often asked, Andy, I also see this screen in Microsoft Groups and Microsoft Teams and in SharePoint. Which is the best option? To be honest, it doesn't matter. It's whatever you find comfortable. And you can see here now when I click onto this drop down arrow, the anyone feature isn't available because it's been set hard coded at the tenant, if you will. So for this particular site, I'm going to choose existing guests only. All right, so there you go. As you can see, you can set it at the tenant level, but you can also set it at the sharing level as well. Access control. So if you are using tools like Intune to manage your mobile devices, or if you're a small business, and you might want to control how users access SharePoint on unmanaged devices, are you going to allow it? So for example, if you've got a device that's unmanaged, so for example, a guest device, are you going to allow access to your SharePoint sites? That's quite useful actually. Idle session timeout. Do you want to set a timeout? So beyond an hour, it will basically log the user out if they walk away from their desk. You can also do network location. Network locations, you can place the user's IP address ranges in here. So that means that you can only access SharePoint from those locations. Apps that don't use modern authentication. Modern authentication is apps that don't support multi-factor authentication. And again, this is a serious security risk. So I would definitely leave that blocked, by the way. Do you want to restrict any OneDrive access here? So again, restrict OneDrive access only to users in the specified security groups. So if they're members of a particular security group, they can only access OneDrive content. All right, so that is access control. In your settings here, we have a number of both SharePoint and OneDrive settings. So again, you can set your home page for SharePoint. You can set up notifications. SharePoint, you can choose, are you going to allow modern content or classic content? To be honest, you would use modern content. The classics, it's an old version of SharePoint. You wouldn't really use that anymore. Do you want to set default settings? So you can do that. Again, you can also set things like storage limits as well. Although I have to be honest, automatic is generally fine. But if you want to manually set storage limits, of course you can do that as well. Then we've got OneDrive. So again, do you want to allow notifications to users in OneDrive? Do you want to allow retention? So the default, by the way, is 30 days. But again, if you've got an E3 or above, you can actually change that to 90 days. And that just means anything that the user drops into their recycle bins typically won't be deleted. You can also configure the storage limit, and this is a neat trick. So by default, every user gets a terabyte of storage, but you can actually increase this to 5 terabytes of storage for free. Now you need to have an E3 or either E3, G3 or an A3 account for this. Okay, that's cool. And then finally sync. So again, do you want to allow users to sync files and folders to their desktops? So if they're using the OneDrive app on their computer, again, you've got some various syncing options here where you can block, for example, certain file types or block certain address ranges and so on. Okay, so there we go. That is the settings there. Other things that we've got here, you've also got the content store, and I'm going to cover this in a more advanced session. Okay. Now, migrating to Microsoft 365 and SharePoint particularly can often seem a bit daunting. But here what we have is we have a whole bunch of tools that can really make your life a lot easier. So things like Ignite, SharePoint, the migration tool. So if you're migrating from SharePoint Online, you can download the tool and you can make those connections that way. If you've got Dropbox, Google Workspace, Microsoft Stream for migrating videos, Box, and so on. You can also migrate shares as well. So on-premises shares, you can bring them directly into Microsoft 365 here. I'm often asked, Andy, do I recommend a third-party tool? I would say probably ShareGate is probably one of the most widely known ones out there. Then, of course, we have a number of different reports that you can view. So again, this shows you all the overall performance. You can drill into these reports if that's important to you. And also you can view reports for things like data access, governance. Again, I'll cover this in a future session. Finally, we have got advanced, and this is for developers. So giving application programming interface access to developers. Now, I mentioned that SharePoint also has classic features, and many of those classic features can be found here. These are essentially the features that use the old interface and that haven't been properly migrated yet. And you can find these here. Again, you can see that some of these have been migrated already. So if you're looking for classic features, that's where you'll find them. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, a quick overview of SharePoint administration tools. So there you have it. There's my session today, Microsoft SharePoint Online. I really hope that you enjoyed the session. And if you did, then go ahead, bump that subscribe button, ring the bell, and come on join our learning community here. That's it for this week. You stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Take care. Hey, thanks so much for dropping by today. Here's a couple of videos that you may enjoy, and while you're here, go ahead, click on the subscribe button and you won't miss out.